One that upreed with his shore sota, the drucht of March hath passed to the rota, unbothered every vine in sweet liquor of which virtue engendered is the floor. One Zephyrus eke with his sweet breath in spirit hath in every heart and hath the tender croppus, and the younger son hath in the ram his halve corsi run, and smala fool smaken melodia that slepen all the night with open ear. So pricketh him naturen hier courages. Then lunken folk to go on pilgrimages, and pomeres for to saken stranje strondes, to ferne halves, kuden sondre londes, and specially from every shear's end of Engeland to Canterbury thy wend, thy halle blissfir martyr for to sega, that him hath holpen one that thy were sega. Welcome to Module 2. We're moving on from Anglo-Saxon literature to Middle English literature. The Norman invasion of 1066 transformed both English and the English language. Whereas prior to 1066, the English language looked and sounded very much like German. After the advent of William's ascendancy to the throne, and then those of his that of his children, the courtly language of England, the language that the wealthy, that the aristocratic, that the royalty spoke in court, was Norman French. And that would be the official language of England for several centuries. Nevertheless, the common people who spoke English did not relinquish their language. And so, in the end, the language that we do speak is essentially that original Anglo-Saxon language, but with serious modifications that came through the influence of French and Latin sources. In essence, what transpired was that English was romanticized, and by that I mean that an influence of Romance languages, the languages that descended from Latin, entered into the English language, and it changed our grammar. It changed a lot of our words, the pronunciations of some of the words that stuck around, so to speak, and by the time we get to someone like Geoffrey Chaucer, whom you heard me reading earlier, despite the fact that the language looks unusual, it is the language for more or less that we speak, and most of the words in the Canterbury Tales that you read, you can recognize. There are a number that need to be footnoted because either they're words that we no longer use, or they're words that we do use, but we don't use them in the same way. So I'll say a little something more about Chaucer in a moment, but I want to backtrack a little bit. The prior to Chaucer and the resurgence of vernacular English, so to speak, the dominant language for English literature, certainly from 1066 until maybe the end of the 12th century, was French. And so you are going to read excerpts from one of the most important writers of Norman French, or what's called Anglo-Norman French, and that is Marie de France, we have 4 sections that you'll be looking at, 4 stories essentially, and the types of stories that she wrote are referred to as lays, Lais. A lay, and you'll see about this in looking at the resources, but a lay is a particular type of courtly story. And so the values that appear in Marie de France are not going to be the same values and the same observations that someone like Chaucer is going to make. Marie de France was of the nobility, and so the values and the characters that she writes about are noble characters, also from the nobility, and they espouse or embody values that the nobility believed in. You're going to see too that Marie de France's work also exhibits the developing interest in courtly or romantic love, the kind of love that you're familiar with if you know the story of Lancelot and Guinevere, or of many of the courtly romances that feature King Arthur and his knights. Chaucer, on the other hand, was middle class. He was a bureaucrat, essentially, and the focal point of his work is quite different. The people that he writes about are of a very broad spectrum of English society in the 14th century. Everyone from a knight to various church officials to even minor governmental officials like the Reeve, or the person whose story you're going to be reading, a miller. And the miller's tale is quite funny. So let me proceed with what resources I provided for you here in this module, and then we'll talk about the assignments. I've provided you with what I believe are some very good resources that will fill you in on the historical background of this period, and also give you insight into the specific authors that we're looking at. So in section 1, or I guess you could say chapter 1, but there's 2 sub-chapters, we have resources that deal with the Norman Conquest and the political and social ramifications of that, followed by the way in which English transforms during this medieval period, moving from Anglo-Saxon to what we call now Middle English. I have borrowed from a colleague a lecture that she has prepared and put on YouTube about Marie de France, because she's more of an expert than I am in this matter. I think you'll find that she will give you ample information that will make reading Marie de France, especially as a representative of a very important genre of medieval literature, and also a wider subject matter, medieval literature, romance literature. I think you'll find that she will provide you with a lot of good information. Then the 3 videos about Chaucer, one of which features Terry Jones from Monty Python, who in his second life, after his work with Python, he became something of a minor but important medieval scholar, certainly a medieval popularizer, writing a number of books and also producing a number of documentaries and series for the BBC. So I think that all of these will make, especially the ones featuring featuring Chaucer. I think they'll make what might otherwise be intimidating literature um, more more friendly to you. Um, with Chaucer, take your time with that. The there are paraphrases out there. There are quote unquote translations into modern English. I'm sure that y'all are all enterprising students and will find them. However, do spend some time wrestling with the original language because poetry is always what is lost in translation. To quote the very popular adage, there's something that simply updating the language something is going to be lost in that process. And in a very funny story like The Miller's Tale, which involves a lot of racy details, Chaucer's very frank about them. He's very frank about what body parts he's writing about, for example. Or he's very frank about what gets put where. I'm not going to tell you the full story. I want you to enjoy it and be surprised at the conclusion when all of the gags are set up and then come to fruition. It is farcical, it's very funny, and of course, it's an example of the Miller's Tale is of a fabliau. So do try to work through it as best you can. I understand you're going to need a crib. Go ahead and find yourself a crib. A crib, of course, is a more updated version of the stories. Have the crib handy, but try to at least go back and forth so you can get a feel for the language, because you might never come back to it again. On the other hand, you may decide this is worth working through. I've worked through it, and I think it's beautiful. For the um, for the form this week, I'm asking you to go back and do a little comparative, I guess in this case, contrasting analysis of the mood. Sorry, yeah, of the mood that you found in The Wanderer and Beowulf, and the mood that you find in Chaucer. I think, especially in those opening lines, the ones that I quoted, ending with line 18, that hem hath holpen one that I would say. I think that entire description of springtime should stand in stark contrast to the world that the Wanderer poet and the Beowulf poet paint. But that's up to you to determine. Also, I think looking at some of the various depictions of the travelers, the knight, for example, but also someone like the prioress or the wife of Bath. These are very interesting portraits of people of, again, a wide variety of social strata. And so I'm curious, and I think it's good training for you to be able to look at these two different worlds, or I should say perhaps writing from these two different periods, and recognize different worlds being built by these poets. In a similar vein, the the essay for this module asks you to look at the Miller's Tale and one of Marie de France's lays, and since both of them have as as an important theme love, although love of different types, I suppose. Since they both focus on love, I would love to see, no pun intended, um, how you um, how you distinguish between the way in which Marie de France depicts love and the way that Chaucer's Miller depicts love. Are those differences? What are the differences? Do they have to do with the audience that was hearing or reading the two different works? And Chaucer's audience is not the same audience as Marie de France's audience. Is Does that affect the the ways in which each writer presents these stories of love? The sources of these stories, they're different. Um, for in the case of Marie de France, the stories are those that were being circulated in the courts of Europe. In Chaucer's instance, the Fabliaux is kind of an extended um, joke told among the more common sorts of people. Does that affect the way in which love is presented? Is the difference simply in the genre itself, or do these two presentations suggest um, different attitudes toward love depending on different worldviews? There's a lot to choose from here. I'm not going to tell you. Oh, just say this. It's a very rich topic that you can take in a number of different directions. As always, you learn nothing by farming out your thinking to someone else. By that I mean, if you are not doing your own work to wrestle with and come up with this interpretation, then you have achieved nothing. Your accomplishment, whatever that grade might be, is nothing. And you take with you into the world from this class nothing. That might not seem like anything to worry about right now. It will be. And you may mark my words about that. So I certainly hope that you enjoy your reading, and I hope you enjoy the wrestling with these questions. Have fun writing, as you should always. And remember, if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right.